does this product even perform well top of search? If not, why are we wasting money? There's a category assessment alongside of a brand budget assessment. But do you do the assessment before you would go through and you would say, okay, these are specific campaigns where we feel like this strategy makes sense to lean into? Or do you take a look at the current ad performance and then say, okay, we feel like there's potential here. Now let's go assess category and budget?
It's a bit of both. There are brands that we work with who say, hey, as long as you're under a certain tacos KPI, spend what you want.
Yeah.
As long as we're performing at or above the account level conversion rate. We have to understand what the amount of clicks we can afford on a specific bid and budget and the keyword conversion rate under that specific target if you're going to properly allocate money towards a keyword isolation, a top of search strategy. It depends on the brand's willingness to spend in that spend. It is extremely expensive.
How do you afford top of search placements when you have a specific tacos goal that you're trying to fit, or maybe you have a specific budget that you have to spend every day? Well, I'm so excited for this conversation. It has only been teased. I have no idea what Adam's going to say. So I'm really excited to talk to Adam Mellott, a head of service delivery over at Better Media. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It is great to be here. Happy to record and a long time coming. I feel like you and I have chatted on more than one occasion, talked, Accelerate, et cetera, and have never had this opportunity. So I'm really, really excited to pick your brain.
No, I'm super excited and also really intrigued. You teased me with the strategy ahead of this call. So I'm really geeking out right now. But before I want to dive right into that. But before we get there, do you want to just give a quick 2-second introduction to yourself, who you guys are?
Yeah. So I am Adam Mellott, head of service delivery at Better Media. Better Media is an advertising focused agency, formerly largely Amazon, but now expanding into a ton of different retail platforms. And essentially we lead and curate strategy for enterprise and private label brands on Amazon, Walmart, Target, et cetera, et cetera.
Amazing. I'm sure there'll be multiple conversations on all of those other platforms, as there's a lot of Amazon sellers trying to get into those. But do you want to give us, let's dip our toes in, let's get an idea. So this is very common, right? You're like, okay, I need to rank my product, which typically makes top of search very important, especially for, specific keywords or things you want to go after. So we know that, and yet top of search can get really freaking expensive these days, especially in some certain categories. So how in the world do you play that field? Do you want to give us an overview of kind of the basic strategy and then we can dive into it?
Yeah. So, I can preface this conversation by saying that no two placements, of course, as we know on Amazon are equal, right? We have top of search, we have rest of search, we have page 2 and beyond, we have product detail pages, et cetera, et cetera. But generally speaking, we see our engagement, the majority of our engagement, at least sponsored product specific, allocated to one spot, right? And that's largely top. The intent behind serving impressions underneath those specific ad placements should not be linear with your intent in serving impressions on product detail pages, on rest of search, et cetera, nor does the cost line up with each other, right? So, thinking about how can I afford top of search placement, both sponsored brand video, and sponsored products, both to educate the consumer base and to rank for your top keywords, I think is something that all brands should at least work into their budget for the reasons, which I'm sure we'll get into here.
Yeah, absolutely. You said it's top of search. In some ways, I feel like it's overhyped, and then other ways, I feel like it's underhyped. Like there's, to your point, there seems to be this, okay, there is nothing but top of search. And as you just got, top of search is super expensive. And, there is validity in sales velocity you get from other placements. So it's kind of like this or that. But as you said, if you look at the performance metrics, top of search often well outperforms from a click-through rate standpoint and a conversion rate standpoint all of the other placements. But the problem is that cost per clicks, everybody's vying for that spot. Everybody wants it, which means cost per clicks are really, I don't want to say inflated, because obviously the market dictates the cost, but in some ways it kind of feels that way. But yet we're kind of oftentimes stuck between this. So I feel like in my mind, so often you're stuck between this rock and a hard place of, I need to pay for it because I need to get that visibility and that performance, but cost prohibitive, I don't feel like I can't. And it sounds like you're saying there is a way to get out of that conundrum.
Yeah, high level and brand specific, category specific, of course. This is a conversation that we have with our brands all the time. A good example here would be apparel versus electronics as an example, right? Apparel is so subjective. So
Yeah.
if you're going to invest a large portion that's serving impressions at top of search, what resonates with that category the most? Well, of course, it's design, right? It's not
Yeah.
necessarily a problem that a product solves. So you can't expect to have the same conversion rate, at least that relative increase in conversion rate at top of search across certain apparel brands as you
Mhm.
would, let's say, a consumer electronics brand where
Yeah.
price generally is king, right? With that being said, testing, and understanding keyword and search term specific performance for your flagship products and really for your entire catalog is the most important aspect and most important thing
Mm.
before you even think about allocating budget to top of search, right? Understand your targets and you don't understand your conversion rate. How can you then accurately propose a budget at top of search under X conversion rate, right? So it's a continuous equation that you need to figure out on a brand and category level.
I love how you frame that up because that's 100% correct. There's a product that we're going through right now, and honestly, the brand owner is a little bit surprised. He's like, I don't know why we do really well on product pages, and like for some reason, top of search conversions just like are almost like not even there. So I
Right.
love how you frame that up. So it sounds like there's sort of a pre-step to the method or whatever we're going to discuss is determine where it makes sense to spend. And I'm assuming that's going through an individual product, kind of looking at the existing sponsored product campaigns and then assessing. Do you just look at conversion rate and click-through rate, or what is it that you're looking at?
So generally we'll look at conversion rate and click-through rate for those specific keywords. And that of course is on the ads specific side, right? I want to take a
Mhm.
look at
Yeah.
what's moving the needle in terms of volume, in terms of engagement, et cetera, et cetera. There is a whole other layer to this, right? In terms of, are you working to advertise a premium product at top of search? And is only taking out the sponsored product placement going to do enough to explain to the category
Mhm.
what your product is and why it's worth purchasing? So, I digress in that there are so many different factors that go into a successful top of search strategy. But ultimately, the biggest call out here that I have to make, especially considering that we've deployed this strategy across a handful of different brands and categories, is understanding either your budget and what you have available to spend in terms of strategy allocation in tandem with your category itself, right? You have to understand who you're advertising against, what sort of branding is in that specific category, what sort of brands are capturing the majority of market share. And then you go from there, right? It's more of a incremental spend, push and pull effect. That's kind of where I'll leave that high level. There's a bid ops conversation to be had here. There's
Yeah, I'm sure.
optimism conversation to be had here as well. So more to come.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Let's it up. So I'm going to ask you a clarifying question. When it comes to sort of assessing these things, it sounds like you're looking at it, from okay, let's just get it sounds like does this product even perform well top of search? Like that's like square one. We got to know that. If not, why are we wasting money? And then the question on like the next steps of that, it sounds like you said there's a category assessment alongside of a, brand budget assessment that goes on. But do you do sort of that sort of assessment before you would go through and you would say, okay, these are specific campaigns where we feel like this strategy makes sense to lean into? Or do you take a look at the current ad performance and then say, okay, we feel like there's potential here. Now let's go assess category and budget?
It's a bit of both, and again, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but it's certainly brand specific.
Yeah.
There are brands that we work with who say, hey, as long as you're under, a certain tacos KPI, spend what you want, right? And that makes
Right.
our life in terms of allocating funds to top of search a bit easier,
Yeah.
as long as we're performing at or above the account level conversion rate, right? We have to understand what the amount of clicks we can afford under a specific bid and budget, and
Mhm.
yet understand the keyword conversion rate under that specific target if you're going to properly allocate money towards a keyword
Mhm.
isolation at top of search strategy, right?
Yeah.
As an example, if a keyword cost per click, in order for me to show up at top of search is $10, my conversion rate is 10%. I know
Yeah.
that I can spend $100 on that specific campaign and still hit KPI, right?
Yeah.
So it's sort of this incremental balancing act, if you will, in order to hit whatever KPI you're adhering to in an account.
I like it. I like it. Okay. And I'm assuming, but I do want to clarify and ask because I could be wrong. When you're sort of deploying the strategy, I'm assuming it's more exact match ranking keyword structures and you're not say like, oh, here's an auto campaign that performs top of search. It's very targeted and specific.
100%. And, again, it depends on the brand's willingness to spend in that space, because to your point, it is extremely expensive.
Yeah.
I'll use the example. I manage an officially licensed NFL apparel brand, and that's a largely subjective query, right? From Pittsburgh, I'm a big Steelers guy, so I always default to this example. But, if you think about the way consumers who are in market for a Steelers hoodie would find a Steelers hoodie, there's only so many ways to call a Steelers hoodie, right?
Yeah.
This is a big internal conversation at Better Media as well, where, it makes sense then to rank for that keyword, right? Take a look at your conversion rate under Steelers hoodie exact, assuming that you are, performing well, or at least better than your account average, better than the category average, et cetera, brand metrics. Then, we would want to deploy that strategy. But also, how do I collect search term variation, knowing that this category is so subjective, right? Do I then potentially isolate Steelers hoodie as broader phrase, negating, women's if this isn't a unisex item, et cetera, et cetera? So much nuance to the brand and specific category in which you're deploying the strategy.
Okay. I like it. So it sounds like there's an addition to, just spending specifically on one target. Again, I'm assuming it's for purposes, or at least market share purposes typically.
Yes.
There's also sort of ancillary strategies, which I agree with you. It's like targeting products that are ranked really well, and like long tail variations, and like all of those things kind of come. The way I've seen it work is like it bolsters the performance of that one. It won't be a substitute for going after the main keyword, but it will help bolster performance. Okay. So that, I feel smart and aligns with our ranking strategy philosophies as well, which is awesome. Or at least what we've observed works. Okay. So we have our keyword. Let's use that example. We know we're going after a top of search. I agree with you. These nuances, especially when it comes to budgets and performance, is ever changing, right? We're like, oh, we're above market conversion rates right now. And then that may change next week when somebody drops their prices. Like those things, I'm sure we'll probably touch on optimizations here. But walk me through sort of how you would assess what kind of budgets or what kind of spend you're going to be allocating to this. We're assuming a specific, I'm assuming maybe single keyword exact match campaign or rank strategy for like a very specific target that we've, again, already identified top of search works well, already identified that conversion rates are strong.
Sure. So my first call out on the optimization front is there's this stipulation, or at least historically, there's been the stipulation in advertising where, account must equate to ACoS, and every strategy should be optimized the same, right? That is the furthest thing from the truth and the most effective method in terms of managing ads in general. If we're talking specifically a single keyword exact match campaign, whose intent or which intent is to serve impressions at top of search and convert, we should be optimizing then for top of search impression share, click-through rate, i.e. engagement, and conversion rate. I do not care what the cost per click for that keyword is, because that specific rank budget or top of search initiative budget is factored into my total budget for the month, and also factored into my TACoS KPI that I need to stay at or under, right? In terms of monthly performance summation, if you will. So example would be, I'll use my Steelers shirt, classic example. If let's say 90% of our budget in this account is allocated to just general sponsored product, sponsored brand strategies where we're optimizing for a target ACoS, and I come into the account with roughly 2 weeks to go in the month, and I say, hey, our spend pace is in good shape. Our TACoS KPI is 10%. We're sitting at 7.5 right now. If I reallocate, let's say $250 a week, that's $1,000 a month, away from profitability focused strategies, potentially, branded strategies that cover our branded SERP, and allocate this to a top of search focused strategy via SP. Number one, what does this do for conversion rate in that placement? What does that do for OPS for that specific item? And what does that do for rank change month over month? Did we increase our organic rank by 5 spots? If that's the case, and we're not seeing a diminishing return, hey, let's continue to incrementally feed this campaign budget, especially through peak time, right? There's this whole other concept where if we're talking seasonality, the NFL is about the biggest mountain and valley you can climb, right? In terms of purchase intent, excitement, et cetera. So all the more reason to allocate additional budget at top of search within that designated window, if that makes sense.
It does make total sense. My mind is thinking through spreadsheets and forecasting, and I'm interested. So I'm assuming that's where you're saying the nuance comes in, like an account where they have certain KPIs, yes, but there's a very defined budget. I know there's a lot of smaller sellers or even like founder-led brands are like, why would you ever do it?
Right.
Happens, okay? There are brands that have a very defined do not cross this line in terms of budget.
Of course.
It is what it is. Right. And then you have the other brand of, we have a total ACoS goal and this is a KPI. And I do want to underline your point of if you have the same ACoS target for every single campaign in your account, you are on track to lose market share and also to overspend, like 100%. I want to highlight, underline, and asterisk that all the way. So what you're saying is like, hey, we can afford to have, again, in that scenario, we're not even worried about what it costs. You're like, I don't even care what the cost per click is because we're doing it from a spend perspective on I can afford this, not I need to have X amount of ACoS, which I'm assuming comes with a ton of setting expectations with the brand and letting them know that like, hey, this is going to look crazy. I promise you there's intention here. So, but when it comes to like really determining that budget, I would love to get personally, because I'm geeking out, I would love to get nitty gritty. So in that scenario, like you said, we have a 10% total ACoS KPI. We have 7%. All right. So we got nice fat, 3% difference. Is that just forecasting what that 3% difference would be in terms of spend and then making sure, again, looking at conversion rates and cost per clicks and forecasting out what spend looks like, or what sort of the mathematics behind that?
Yeah. So great question. I would love to pull up one of my 8 million Excel files to walk through this, but for now I will keep it specific to recording. So if you think about, the relationship between OPS and conversion rate relative to budget, right? This is why I underlined this conversation by saying you have to understand what your top keywords are and how you're converting. And that's going to directly correlate with the amount of money that you can allocate for that specific keyword, right? Or that specific strategy. We ultimately decide that tacos is, let's say 10% and our goal is 15%. We found that we have some money to play with in terms of potentially testing a market share strategy, top of search strategy, whatever you want to refer to it as. I would then need to weigh an equation. Okay, at this cost per click, at this conversion rate, here are the amount of orders I want to drive. Here's the amount of money then I can allocate to this specific strategy. And let's say just for fun, I spend $200 a day on a top of search initiative. What would happen if we, for one day, converted at our ideal conversion rate for that keyword, which we've been tracking? And what would it do to tacos if we spent that money with no orders, right? So it's sort of this what if, what, where, why sort of situation where you have to understand the brand's intent, right? And what they want, I think is most important out of the gate here. And then you work in your defined budget, strategy, et cetera, with the brand's KPI. A good example, 1.5 million brands, that we've worked with that are utilizing a cap budget or essentially, don't have unlimited money. It's just reality of the game. What is that brand's intent on Amazon? If it's to capture market share within a specific category, then we're talking a necessary strategy to deploy across flagship products and top converting keywords, right? So I would think we would need to find a way in terms of optimization, in terms of budget allocation, and in terms of adhering to KPI to make sure that we're deploying the strategy, period, because that is the intent of the brand.
It sounds like you're basically forecasting worst case scenario.
Exactly.
Is that we can afford this amount of spend, and then ideally we don't end up with worst case scenario. And in fact, sales are impacted and sales grow. And I think that's a really good way to view it though, because the assumption is if we're converting and we're kind of benchmarking off of that conversion. And so we're assuming that there are sales that are coming off of that conversion. What we're tracking is ad sales. So we're assuming that the ad sales are going to increase. However, because there is delay in market share growth and rankings and all of that impact and things, that's, I think, the trickiest part to navigate, because that is a complete black box. And I know there's some smart minds trying to work through like, oh, you could like, it's intense. So we have these hypotheses and we test and we see, but the known is okay. Maybe even if we can be certain of the ad sales coming through, which we can't, which is why you're saying this is worst case. If nothing comes through, how is that going to affect the accounts?
Exactly.
But we're even in that best case scenario of ads, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to affect total sales. And if your KPI you're looking for is total ACoS, well, if you increase spend, even if ad sales doing great, doesn't necessarily mean our top line changes immediately. Now, in an ideal world, it does, but that's our test and then which we're hypothesizing, but we're not banking on that happening. So you're saying regardless of what happens, it's almost like what tests when we afford to do before we even run them.
Exactly. It's giving a range of expectation, right? Worst case scenario, this is what we're looking at. We're still under test KPI. We're still pacing for deal budget, right? Because this budget was factored into all of the aforementioned budget.
Yeah.
On the adverse side, here's what will happen if we convert at what we are converting at currently. Here's what you can expect in terms of OPS, increase or decrease. And on the ranking side, right? Let's say we identify an opportunity where we're suppressed in terms of organic ranking, and we find an immediate opportunity to scale that up. What does it look like in terms of total OPS? Does actually this top of search strategy work to offload reliance on ads, which will hypothetically then drive tacos down because you're then additional impressions at top of search that you're not paying for? There are a ton of different scenarios and outcomes with this test. Do I work sponsored brand video into this keyword as well and take up all 3 slots, top, organic, paid, and sponsored brand video? I digress. It just depends on the category.
Got it. So it sounds like you're coming up with the math that says this is my budget. And then you're figuring out from there, do I deploy it all in sponsored product ads? And I'm assuming that also depends on the performance of the other ad types as well to say like, this one may not work, this one may work. Okay, I have 2 questions for you. One, I think I know what you mean, but you keep using OPS. For those who have no idea what that means, you mind defining that real quick?
Ordered product sales.
Awesome. Okay. I thought that's what it was. I'm just making sure. And then second question would be, and this is my assumption, but I would love to hear if this is correct. There's some sort of, are you putting a budget on the campaign, or how are you defining like, this is the amount that I want to spend? Because we all know for those high search volume keywords, you jack up bids for hitting top of search. It almost feels like they could spend to infinity. So is there like a meter that you're putting on it?
Yeah. So, essentially you factor the amount of budget you can spend on X initiative into the equation before you deploy, of course, right? And this is where the forecasting comes into play. We actually exclude these campaigns from bid ops because I do not want these keyword bids adjusted whatsoever. If you're thinking true top of search initiative, conversion rate, impression share, click-through rate, organic rank change, control lever is at the budget level, right? In the NFL, advertising a Steelers hoodie, knowing that conversion rate more than doubles in January and February into the Super Bowl, assuming the Steelers are good, I'm going to need to allocate additional funds to that specific strategy, right? But that keyword bid stays the same. The control in March post Super Bowl, when conversion rate gets cut in half, is at the budget level. That would be the direct control in terms of tacos, in terms of, spend at the strategy level.
Got it. And you're using your control lever to understand if you can initiate more, how you were saying originally, like, okay, it's a feedback loop and we're testing. So it's saying like, okay, great, fantastic. Rank increased, total sales increased, which means my total ACoS went down. Oh, great. Now I have even more room and I feel like there's more room to push this. So therefore, like you were saying, budgets go up or vice versa. Maybe budgets go down slightly. So again, you're saying budgets will run out at some point during the day.
Without a doubt, unless you can spend some significant cash on dominating a keyword, a high search volume keyword.
Got it. Cool. Which, by the way, I'm a huge advocate for this strategy because I feel like that's a whole nother one. I don't want to go on a rant. I don't want to sidetrack.
4 hours here.
Yes, but budgets will run out in this strategy. But the goal, again, the reason budgets are running out because you need, like you said, you need to be able to put those aggressive bids that allow you that top of search. And if you're only optimizing for budgets, then that necessitates a decrease, which does not make sense given the strategy. Ergo, budgets are going to run out. I promise only 2 other questions for you, but one other one is, do you ever do any sort of, what do they call it? Like day parting strategies to if budgets are running out, we're optimizing. Have you found, it's best to just let the algorithm do what it's going to do and serve what it's going to serve?
Great question. And I knew that this was going to come up at some point because it always does with top of search and generally free, quick spending campaigns. Short answer, no, we do not day part. We will look into week parting, if you want to refer to it as that, i.e. brands that, perform well during the week and then maybe don't see the significant of activity on the weekend. Sure. We have that hard purchase data that suggests, hey, these days, we simply don't move the needle, right? On Amazon, I really lean into the whole basket building approach in terms of how consumers interact on platform, right? Just because a click happens at 8 a.m. does not mean a consumer isn't building their basket to check out
Yeah.
at the end of the day, like I would say the majority of us do. Maybe I'm wrong in that assumption. That's how I function on Amazon. I know that
That's how I function too. My basket is I think I'm going to purchase, or when I'm trying to compare products, the basket is the easiest way to compare products, at least from my opinion.
Exactly. So, with that being said, we do not day part. We want to try and stretch that budget as far as possible, but if you're at a capped budget, you have to be realistic with how much you can spend and
Mhm.
how long that strategy can run its course in terms of delivering through the day, right? But this is where the majority of your other strategies come into play. You still have
Yeah.
representation in the category as far as profitability focused, rest of search strategies, et cetera, et cetera.
Got it. Okay, cool. Well, that makes me feel better. We do practice day parting in some parts and pieces, but I have never found like a universal yes, use day parting. It's
Fair.
like it depends. And again, side rant, but I don't think day parting should make up for lack of budget. Like it's an optimization if it makes sense to add on top of, as you were saying, like week parting and stuff. It's not oh my gosh, I don't have enough budget. Day parting save me.
Exactly. Unless you have significant engagement to time of purchase data that says, hey, the majority of our clicks happen here,
Right.
and this is where the majority of our conversions happen. I just don't think it's realistic for brands to understand that dynamic, that customer dynamic.
Yeah. No, I'm 100% with you. So my last question, a little bit of an optimization question, because I feel like we've gone through it pretty, like we've touched on it. So maybe I'll recap strategy and just let me know if I got it wrong.
Yeah.
It's you're determining where conversion rates make sense. So does top of search work for this product? Square one. Do I have enough budget to be able to even test this strategy? Square two. Then where am I deploying this strategy? Meaning what keywords do I have an exact match in? I'm assuming a campaign structure that I can allow to do this that is converting well, square two. Then we're saying, okay, then we're deploying aggressive bids. So you're saying we only care about impression share. We only care about our conversion rates top of search. Bids high enough to get that top of search impression share up. All right, fantastic. Make sure we're deploying budgets to make sure we're staying within our goals. And then from there, you're enacting based on the impact of the account. Are we staying within KPIs being budget or total ACoS? If yes, fantastic. We have room to play. And then kind of constant feedback loop from there. And then you sound like you're like, we're not really doing bid optimization. I'm assuming there's an optimization for impression share, or if you see like issues with conversion rates, but otherwise, providing that those initial KPIs are correct, we're sticking with that. Fantastic.
Awesome.
Last question would be, I know somebody else is going to be in the comments asking about if you deploy any sort of top of search placement percentages on these things.
Good question. In general, no. However, if I want to give a campaign a bit of juice in terms of influencing that campaign to serve the top of search and bid ops is not being run within that campaign, right? Sky high bids excluded from bid ops because we're up for top of search impression share, then hypothetically, a top of search modifier would not impact overall CPC, right? It would impact where we're serving impressions. So with that said, across these specific campaigns, yes, in general, I'll give it between 10 and 25%, and sometimes a bit more if I see some impressions or some engagement trickling across rest of search or product pages.
Okay. I like it. It sounds like primarily focused on bids to drive that top of search, and then a slight push with placement percentage, if that makes sense. Sorry,
Exactly.
I thought of one more question. Is there a type of campaign bidding strategy you use on these? So dynamic down only, fixed bids, dynamic up and down. Do you
Great
found
question.
something that works best?
Fixed bids. I want utmost control of my bid settings or lack thereof, I guess, in top of search focused initiatives, especially considering that we're excluding these campaigns from bid ops. So I do not want to give Amazon or the algorithm an opportunity to increase or decrease any further.
Got it. Okay, that would have been my guess, but I appreciate the clarification. Awesome. This has been fantastic. A really fantastic strategy. I really appreciate you being willing to get in the weeds. Again, there's always nuances to everything, but I feel like you explained it very, very well, and I appreciate that. If anyone wanted to get a hold of you guys at Better Media, you guys are doing some amazing things. If they're like, hey, I'd love to work with you guys, where can someone reach out?
Yeah, so you can find any of us on LinkedIn, myself, Adam Mellott on LinkedIn. You can go to our page on LinkedIn, Better Media. Check us out at bettermedia.com. Those would be the best places.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it. This has been a fantastic conversation. I'm sure we'll have you on for more.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. It's been a pleasure.